The storm howled across the broken land, heavy winds lifting dust and sharp stones into the air. Lightning cracked above the jagged mountains, and the ground trembled as if the planet itself was angry. Through the chaos, a lone human pushed forward, his eyes fixed on the distant glow of a burning wreck. He had seen the ship fall from the sky only minutes ago, tearing through the atmosphere before crashing into the valley. Something inside him refused to turn away. Someone might still be alive. As he climbed over shattered rocks, his boots slipping on the wet ground, the human could hear faint cries. They were not human cries. They carried a strange tone, soft, yet filled with pain. He moved faster, his body fighting the wind, his arms raised to shield his face. The smell of smoke filled the air as he reached the broken remains of the alien vessel. Flames licked at twisted metal, and strange sparks flickered from panels that had once held power. There, among the broken pieces, he saw her, a young alien. Girl lay half buried under wreckage, her skin pale and marked with wounds, her breathing shallow. Her eyes were half open, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light, but filled with fear and exhaustion. She tried to move, but the pain forced her still. The human's heart tightened. He had seen soldiers fall in battle. He had seen people broken by war, but something about this girl struck deeper. She was too young, too fragile, left to die in the storm. Without thinking, he rushed forward, pulling away the heavy piece of metal that pinned her down. The weight fought against him, the sharp edges cutting into his hands, but he refused to let go. With a final push, he freed her and quickly crouched beside her. Her voice was weak, trembling like the storm around them. Why would you help me? The human looked at her, rain pouring across his face, dust clinging to his hair. Because no one deserves to die alone, he answered, lifting her carefully into his arms. She cried out in pain, her wounds burning at the movement, but she did not resist. She rested against him, her breaths shallow yet steady. The storm grew worse. Thunder rolled across the mountains and the ground shook under the weight of distant tremors. He tightened his grip around the alien girl, holding her close as he carried her away from the burning wreck. The heat of the flames followed them, but he kept moving, his legs straining against the mud and stone. Every step felt longer. Every gust of wind tried to throw them down. The girl's faint light glowed against his chest, her life slipping like sand through fingers, but he refused to stop. He remembered the faces of those he could not save in the past, the silence of broken camps, the emptiness of war, and he promised himself this time would be different. She stirred in his arms, her voice trembling. They left me. They wanted me to die. Her words struck him harder than the storm. Who could leave a child like this broken and bleeding without mercy? He had no answer, only anger and sorrow filling his chest. He pressed forward, whispering back to her, "Not anymore. You are not alone now." The valley stretched ahead, shadows twisting in the storm. He knew a small cave nearby, a shelter he had once used when traveling. If he could reach it, they would have a chance. His muscles burned as he carried her, but he ignored the pain. He looked down at her face. So delicate, yet carved with suffering. No child should bear. Finally, through the whipping winds and endless rain, the cave appeared. A narrow entrance hidden by fallen rocks, a place untouched by the storm. With the last of his strength, he slipped inside, the sound of the storm fading as the walls closed around them. He laid the girl gently on the ground, pulling his old pack from his shoulder. Inside were bandages, a water flask, and a small lamp that cast a warm glow on the cold stone walls. The alien girl's eyes opened wider, watching him with fear and confusion. She whispered, "Why risk your life for me? I am not one of you." The human met her gaze, his voice firm yet gentle. "Because you are alive, and that is reason enough." As he cleaned her wounds and wrapped the bandages, her breathing slowed, no longer racing with fear but calming into fragile hope. For the first time since the crash, her trembling stopped. She looked at him, not as a stranger, but as a shield between her and the storm. Outside, the thunder still roared. The lightning still split the sky, but inside the cave, a fragile bond had been born. The human did not know what future waited, or why this girl had been abandoned. But one truth echoed in his heart. He had saved her, and now her life was tied to his. And somewhere deep inside, a story far greater than either of them could imagine, was only beginning. The cave was dark and cold, but to the human it felt like a fortress compared to the raging storm outside. He lit the small lamp, its warm glow pushing back the shadows and revealing the damp stone walls. The alien girl lay on the ground, weak but breathing more evenly than before. Her pale skin shimmered faintly in the light and her eyes half opened, watching him with caution. He crouched beside her, opening his pack again. He had little to give. Just water, a few strips of dried food, and some bandages. Carefully he lifted her head and pressed the water flask to her lips. She sipped slowly, her throat trembling as she swallowed, but she did not pull away. For the first time he saw something in her eyes that was not fear. It was trust, fragile but real. The girl's voice was soft, almost like the sound of wind slipping through broken glass. "You should have left me," she said, her words filled with pain. "They all did." The human shook his head, his tone steady. "I could not do that, not when you were still breathing." She closed her eyes, tears sliding down her temples. "My own people abandoned me. They said I was weak, a burden to carry. They wanted the storm to finish me." Her words carried weight heavier than the storm outside. The human clenched his fists, anger building inside him, not at her, but at the cruelty she had faced. He had seen cruelty before. He had seen how the strong crushed the weak, but hearing it from her lips lit a fire in him. He placed another bandage across her arm, careful not to hurt her. "You are not weak. You survived a crash. You are still fighting even now," he told her firmly. The alien girl looked at him with trembling eyes as if she was trying to believe his words. For a long moment silence filled the cave, only broken by the distant rumble of thunder. To distract her from the pain, he asked gently, "What is your name?" She hesitated, her lips trembling, then whispered, "Sira." The name hung in the air, soft but strong. The human nodded. "Sira, I am Daniel," he said, finally giving his name in return. It was a simple act, but it tied them together in the darkness of the cave. Hours passed as Daniel kept the fire of the lamp alive and watched over Sira. Each time she stirred, he offered water or adjusted her bandages. She whispered broken pieces of her story between heavy breaths. She spoke of her people, of the way she was always treated as less, of how they feared slowing down because of her injuries. She told him how they decided she was not worth saving. Daniel listened without judgment, but deep inside his chest his anger grew. No one deserved to be abandoned like this. Not a child, not anyone. When the storm outside began to soften, the sound of rain slowing to a distant hum, Sira opened her eyes again. "You should not stay near me," she whispered. "If they find me, they will kill you too." Daniel leaned closer, his eyes calm but firm. "Then they will have to go through me first." Her lips trembled, a small sound escaping her throat. Half a sob, half a laugh. No one had ever said such words to her before. In her heart, a new spark began to glow, fragile yet alive. She did not know this human, but his presence felt like a shield, like a wall that stood strong against the world. As night deepened, Daniel leaned against the cave wall, exhaustion pulling at his body. Yet he refused to sleep fully. His ears stayed alert, his eyes scanning the shadows. Every sound outside the cave made him tense, wondering if Sira's pursuers had returned. But as he looked at her fragile form lying under his care, he knew one thing for certain. He would not let her be taken again. Before her eyes closed, Sira whispered faintly, "Why do you care so much? You do not even know me." Daniel looked at her with quiet strength. "Because everyone deserves someone who will fight for them," he said. Her breathing slowed, her body finally giving in to rest. Daniel remained awake, watching the cave entrance as the lamp flickered. The storm had passed, but a greater danger still loomed. He did not know who had abandoned her or why, but he knew they were still out there, and when they came he would be ready. In the silence of the cave, surrounded by shadows and uncertainty, a fragile bond of hope had been formed. Two lives, once strangers, now tied together by fate. The storm outside had ended, but the true storm was only beginning. The morning came slowly. Pale light entered the cave, cutting through the mist outside. Daniel sat at the entrance, his back against the rock, his rifle resting across his knees. He had not slept, but his eyes stayed sharp. Beside him, Sira shifted, on the blanket he had laid out from his pack. Her breathing was steadier now, though her face still showed pain. When she opened her eyes, she looked around with confusion before remembering where she was. The sight of the human sitting guard calmed her. She had not been left alone. He was still there. Daniel turned his head slightly. "You should rest more. Your wounds will need time." Sira gave a small nod, but then whispered, "I cannot rest, not when I know they may come back." Her words stirred the silence of the cave. Daniel studied her face. "Tell me who they are," he said quietly. For a long time she did not answer. Her fingers clenched the edge of the blanket, her lips trembling as if her own memory caused her pain. Finally she spoke, her voice filled with sorrow. "They were my own kind, my group, my blood. We were traveling together when the ship went down. I thought we would protect each other, but when I was hurt, they looked at me as if I was nothing. They said I would slow them down, they said the storm would take me, and then they left me there to die." Daniel's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. He had fought in wars where soldiers left comrades behind, but hearing it in this way made his chest burn. "They abandoned you because you were injured," Sira nodded weakly. "Yes, they said survival was more important than carrying the weak. To them, I was already gone." The human moved closer, his voice steady but firm. "But you are not gone. You are alive, and I will not abandon you." Her eyes shimmered as she stared at him. No one had ever said such words to her. She had been called a burden, a mistake, but never someone worth saving. For a long while, the cave was filled with silence, broken only by the faint sound of wind outside. Daniel gave her a small piece of dried food, and she ate slowly, her hands trembling. Every bite seemed to bring back her strength. Later, as the day stretched on, she spoke again. "My people, they were running from hunters. That is why they were so afraid. The hunters follow us across worlds, capturing the weak, selling them like animals. If those hunters find us here, they will not stop until we are both gone." Words sent a cold shiver down Daniel's spine. He had suspected danger, but this revealed something darker. "Hunters," he repeated. "Who are they hunting for?" Sira lowered her gaze, her voice almost breaking. "They are raiders working for those who profit from suffering. To them, a child is only a prize to sell, and I was the easiest to take." Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but hearing it through her fragile voice made him feel something different, something sharper than anger. A promise grew inside him, silent but strong. As the afternoon turned to night, Daniel kept the fire small inside the cave. Shadows danced across the stone walls, flickering around them. Sira leaned back against the rock, her eyes half closed. She looked so small, so fragile, yet within her carried a strength that refused to die. At one point she asked, her voice faint, "Why do you fight for me, when others would leave?" Daniel looked at her directly. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Because leaving someone behind is the same as killing them. I will never do that, not while I can still stand." Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, a tear slipped from her eye, and she turned her face away. She did not want him to see, but Daniel saw everything. That night, as the storm outside faded into silence, Sira finally slept deeply. Daniel stayed awake, his eyes on the shadows that crept across the cave walls. He knew the hunters were real. He knew they would come. But he also knew something else. Whatever danger lay ahead, he had already chosen his path. And though Syrah did not know it yet, her story was no longer hers alone. It was tied to his, and in the shadows of the past, a new bond was being forged, one that would be tested by fire, by blood, and by the hunt that was drawing ever closer. The night was quiet, too quiet for Daniel's liking. The storm had passed, leaving the sky clear, but silence itself can be a warning. He sat near the cave entrance with his rifle ready, his eyes scanning the dark valley below. The world looked calm, yet every instinct inside him told him something was wrong. Behind him, Syrah slept lightly. Her breathing was steady, but her body shifted as if her dreams were haunted. Daniel listened to the rhythm of her breaths, grounding himself with the reminder that she was still alive. That was enough to keep him awake. A sound carried through the valley. Faint at first, almost like the cry of a bird. Then it came again, sharper this time. Not nature, something else. Daniel's muscles tightened. He had heard sounds like this before during raids on outer colonies. Whistles used by hunters to signal each other in the night. He moved deeper into the cave and crouched beside Syrah, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "Wake up," he whispered. Her eyes opened at once, fear flashing in them as if she already knew. "They found us," she whispered back, her voice trembling. Daniel nodded. "Stay low. Do not make a sound." He moved to the entrance again, crouching, behind the rocks. Shadows moved along the valley floor, figures slipping between the stones with practiced silence. There were at least 4 of them, maybe more, each carrying weapons that glinted in the pale light. Their movements were organized, like predators closing in on prey. One of them raised a device that pulsed with faint blue light. Daniel recognized it instantly. A life scanner. They were searching for heat signatures. His heart pounded. If the device swept near the cave, they would find Syrah without question. Daniel gripped his rifle tightly, weighing his options. Running was impossible. The valley was wide open and Syrah was still too weak to move fast. Hiding deeper in the cave might work, but if they searched carefully, it would only delay the inevitable. He had one choice. He had to stop them before they got close. He steadied his breath and took aim. The hunters crept closer, their faces masked with metal visors, their steps silent against the stone. Daniel pulled the trigger. The crack of his rifle split the night, and one of the hunters fell instantly, dropping the scanner. The others shouted, their voices sharp and cruel. Bolts of energy lit the valley as they fired blindly toward the cave. Rocks exploded, sparks flying into the darkness. Daniel pressed against the stone, reloading quickly, his jaw tight. Inside the cave, Syrah covered her ears, her body shaking with terror, but she forced herself not to scream. She remembered Daniel's words, "Stay low, stay quiet." The hunters spread out, circling the valley floor. Daniel fired again, hitting another one who dropped with a heavy thud. But he knew the remaining 2 would not back down. They were professionals, and now they knew exactly where he was. A sharp blast struck the rock beside him, showering him with dust and fragments. He ducked back into the cave, his heart pounding. Syrah crawled closer, her eyes wide. "You cannot fight them alone," she whispered. Daniel met her gaze, his voice steady. "I do not have a choice." Before he could return to the entrance, one of the hunters appeared at the cave mouth. Tall, armored, weapon raised. Daniel reacted instantly, swinging the rifle up and firing. The blast echoed like thunder, and the hunter collapsed at the entrance. But the last one was faster. From the side, another shadow leapt forward, a blade glinting in the faint light. Daniel dropped his rifle and caught the hunter's wrist before the blade could fall. The 2 struggled, muscles straining, their grunts filling the cave. The hunter was stronger, but Daniel's rage gave him strength. With a sudden push, he twisted the blade back, driving it into the attacker's chest. The hunter gasped and crumpled, falling heavily to the stone floor. Silence returned, broken only by Daniel's heavy breathing. He stood still for a moment, his hands shaking, the smell of smoke and blood filling the cave. Slowly, he turned back to Sira. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with both fear and awe. "You fought them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You fought them for me." Daniel wiped the sweat from his face and nodded. "And I will keep fighting until no one can take you again." Sira's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from pain. She looked at him as if seeing something impossible, a protector where she once had none, a wall between her and the darkness that chased her. Outside, the valley was still. The bodies of the hunters lay motionless, their weapons silent. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. If a group had tracked her here, more would come. And next time they might bring an army. Inside the cave, as Sira leaned weakly against the wall, Daniel sat down beside her. He loaded his rifle again, his face hard with determination. He had made his choice the moment he carried her from the wreckage. He would fight no matter the cost, and in that moment, as Sira whispered his name like a fragile prayer, Daniel realized something. The fight was no longer about survival alone. It was about protecting a bond that was forming, one that neither of them fully understood, but one that both of them needed. The hunters had come and fallen, but their shadow lingered, and soon that shadow would grow. The smell of smoke and blood still hung in the cave long after the hunters fell. Daniel sat near the entrance, his rifle across his lap, his body tense though the fight was over. His eyes scanned the valley again and again, waiting for another shadow, another sign of danger. But all was silent. Behind him, Sira shifted against the wall, her breathing uneven. She had watched every moment of the battle, and though fear had gripped her, she had also felt something she never thought possible: safety. Daniel had stood against them without hesitation. He had faced death not for himself, but for her. When she tried to sit up, her strength gave out and she let out a soft cry. Daniel turned quickly, leaving his post to kneel beside her. "Careful," he said gently, steadying her with his hands. Her eyes met his, glowing faintly in the lamplight. "Why do you keep risking yourself?" she whispered. "You could have walked away and been free of me." Daniel looked at her for a long moment before answering. His voice was low, steady, filled with something heavier than duty. "Because no one deserves to be thrown away. Not you, not anyone. As long as I stand, you are not alone." Her lips trembled. She wanted to speak, but the words died before reaching her tongue. Instead, a tear slid down her cheek. She turned her face slightly, embarrassed by her weakness, yet Daniel lifted her chin gently so their eyes stayed locked. "You have survived. This far, Sira. That is not weakness, it is strength," he said firmly. The fire of his words sank into her heart. She had lived her whole life hearing she was a burden, a mistake, a weight others had to carry. And now here was someone calling her strong. It broke something inside her, and at the same time, it healed something too. Hours passed as Daniel cared for her wounds again. His hands were rough, scarred from battles long past, yet gentle when they touched her skin. He cleaned the cuts, wrapped fresh bandages, and shared what little food he had. He gave her more than he kept for himself, though hunger gnawed at his own stomach. The night outside was calm, but the fire inside the cave flickered with warmth. Sira leaned closer to the flame, her face soft in its light. "My people never looked at me the way you do," she admitted quietly. "They saw me as a weight. You see me as something else." Daniel leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "I see you as someone worth saving. That is enough for me." For a long while, silence filled the space between them, but it was no longer heavy. It carried a quiet peace, something both of them had not felt in a long time. As dawn began to break outside, Sira finally spoke again. "You fought them like you have fought before. You are no stranger to battle." Daniel's gaze drifted to the valley beyond. "I was a soldier once. I learned to fight because I had no choice, but somewhere along the way I forgot what it meant to fight for the right reason. Tonight reminded me. Protecting you gave my struggle meaning again." Her heart beat faster at his words. She studied his face, the scars etched into his skin, the weariness in his eyes. He was a man shaped by war, but beneath it she saw something her people never understood. Compassion. "You remind me of what my people forgot," she whispered. "That strength is not about leaving the weak behind. It is about carrying them forward." Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he gave a small nod, a gesture that carried more than words. The bond between them had grown, forged not in calm or comfort, but in fire and danger. Every shared glance, every word spoken in the dark was like a thread binding them closer. Later, as Sira drifted into uneasy sleep, Daniel kept watch by her side. His body ached from the fight. His wounds stung, but his resolve was unbroken. He glanced at her fragile form resting under the blanket and whispered to himself, "I will not fail you." The valley outside still hid dangers. The hunters would not stop, and more would come. But in that cave, in that fragile moment of peace, something stronger than fear had been born. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, both knew the truth. They were no longer just survivor and protector. They were becoming something greater, something that neither storm nor hunter could tear apart. The cave was quiet again, the fire burning low, but Daniel could not rest. He sat near the entrance, staring at the dim horizon where the first signs of dawn touched the sky. His hands were steady on his rifle, yet his heart carried the weight of what had just happened. He had faced hunters before, but never with someone depending on him the way Sira did. Behind him, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, catching the flicker of the firelight. She saw him sitting guard again, his frame outlined against the morning glow. For a moment she just watched him, her mind heavy with thoughts she had carried too long. Finally, her voice broke the silence. "Daniel," she whispered, her tone fragile. He turned at once, moving closer. "What is it? Are you in pain?" She shook her head weakly. "Not pain. Not only pain. There is something I must tell you. Something I have kept hidden because I feared you would turn away like the others." Daniel frowned, but his voice stayed calm. "You can tell me anything." Her lips trembled. She took a long breath before speaking, as if every word carried heavy stones. "I am not alone. Inside me there is life. I carry a child." The words hung in the cave like thunder. Daniel froze, his rifle slipping slightly from his grip. For a moment he thought he had misheard her, but her trembling hands pressed against her stomach, and he understood. She was not only fighting for herself, she was fighting for the small, fragile life within her. Sira's eyes filled with tears as she continued, her voice breaking. "When my people abandoned me, they abandoned my child too. They said I would never survive, and if I did, the child would only be another burden. They left me to die with it. I thought you would do the same if you knew." Daniel's chest tightened. He looked at her, not just as a wounded survivor, not just as someone betrayed, but as a mother who carried the weight of two lives. His mind raced, but his heart spoke first. He reached out, his hand covering hers as it rested against her stomach. "You are not a burden, and neither is your child," he said firmly. His voice carried no hesitation, only truth. "If they abandoned you both, then I will stand for you both. I will not walk away." Sira's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken such words to her. The tears that slid down her cheeks were not only of sorrow now, but of release, of hope she thought she had lost forever. "You would take this child as your own?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Daniel nodded, his eyes steady on hers. "If this child has no father, then I will be that father. You are not alone anymore, neither of you are." Her lips trembled, and she closed her eyes as more tears flowed. For so long she had believed her story ended in the wreck, her child destined never to see the light. Now in the arms of a human who owed her nothing, She felt the first spark of a future. Daniel helped her sit up, supporting her gently. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, her tears soaking his shirt. He held her firmly, not as a soldier holding the wounded, but as a protector holding something far greater. For the first time since his own wars ended, Daniel felt a purpose that was not born of duty or orders. This was different. This was personal. The day outside grew brighter, but danger still lingered beyond the valley. The hunters would return, stronger and in greater numbers. Daniel knew the fight was far from over. Yet when he looked at Sira and the fragile life she carried, his resolve hardened like steel. He had something to protect, something worth dying for if needed. Sira lifted her face to him, her eyes glowing faintly. "You are not like anyone I have ever known. You gave me hope when all I wanted was to close my eyes forever." Daniel brushed a strand of her hair back from her face. "Hope is not gone, not while you are alive, not while this child waits to live. Together, we will keep moving, and together we will survive." The bond between them was no longer fragile. It had been reforged in truth and in promise. No storm, no betrayal, no hunter could take it away. And as the light of morning filled the cave, the future stretched before them, not empty, not hopeless, but filled with something both terrifying and beautiful. A family was forming, born not of blood but of choice and sacrifice. The morning sun rose over the valley, its light breaking across the jagged rocks and washing away the shadows of the night. Daniel stood at the mouth of the cave, scanning the horizon with sharp eyes. The land was calm for now, but he knew it was only a matter of time before more hunters came searching. He could not stay here. He and Sira needed to move, and they needed to move soon. Behind him, Sira slowly pushed herself upright, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She was still weak, her body carrying wounds that had not fully healed, but her spirit was no longer broken. Her gaze followed Daniel, and she felt something stir inside her. Trust, a feeling she thought she would never know again. "Will they come back?" she asked softly. Daniel turned, his expression firm but calm. "Yes, they will come, and they will come harder than before. That is why we must leave. Out there beyond these valleys there are ships, colonies, places where they cannot reach us so easily. We must find them. We must keep moving forward." Her lips trembled. The idea of leaving terrified her, yet the thought of staying was worse. She lowered her eyes, then lifted them again, strength building inside her. "Then I will follow you. Wherever you go, I will go. Not only for myself, but for the child. For us." Daniel crossed the cave and knelt beside her, helping her rise. She leaned against him, fragile yet determined, her small frame steadying itself on his arm. For a moment, the world outside did not matter. All that mattered was the bond they had built, born in fire, tested in storm, unbroken by betrayal. Together they stepped out into the light. The valley stretched wide before them, scarred by battle and storm, yet touched by the promise of dawn. The ground was harsh, but every step Daniel took was steady, and every step Sira took beside him was braver than the last. As they walked, she spoke again. "You could have left me many times, in the wreck, in the storm, even last night after the hunters, but you stayed. Why?" Daniel glanced at her, his voice carrying quiet strength. "Because life means nothing if we only fight for ourselves. I have fought wars for leaders and flags, and they gave me nothing but scars. But fighting for you, for this child, it gives me something real. It gives me purpose." Her chest tightened at his words. She looked at him not just as a protector, but as something far greater, someone who had chosen her when no one else did. Hours later, as they climbed the ridge overlooking the valley, Sira paused, her breath catching in awe. Beyond the mountains, the land opened wide, revealing the glittering wreckage of old starships scattered like broken bones across the plains. Above them, the sky shimmered with distant stars, endless and bright. She whispered, "So many paths, so many worlds. How Can we find our place in all of this? Daniel wrapped his arm around her shoulders, guiding her forward. We will not search for a place that is given to us. We will make one. Together. His words struck deep, and for the first time, Sira smiled. A small, fragile smile, but one that carried light even in the face of uncertainty. The day stretched. On as they traveled, their steps steady despite exhaustion. They stopped only when the sun began to fall again, finding shelter among the remains of a broken transport ship. Daniel built a small fire, while Sira sat nearby, her hands once again resting over her stomach. In the glow of the flames, she looked at him and spoke softly. When this child is born, I will tell it a story. I will tell it of the man who carried me through the storm, who fought hunters with fire in his heart, who stood when everyone else walked away. And I will tell it. This man is your father, Daniel's throat tightened, his chest heavy with emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. He reached across the fire, his hand finding hers. And I will tell this child that its mother was braver than anyone I have ever known, that she fought against despair and chose to live, that she is the reason we became a family. Their hands stayed together as the fire burned low, the stars shining above them. The night was uncertain, the future more dangerous than either could imagine, but in that moment they no longer felt alone. A human, an alien, and an unborn child. 3 souls walking into the unknown. Not as strangers, not as survivors, but as a family. And as the stars stretched endlessly above, Daniel knew the truth. Home was not a place. It was the people you chose to fight for. And he had found his at last.